Greetings! Welcome to the Devlog for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. We're going to start off as always with a quick sound check. Make sure speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So what have we got here? Well, this is sounding a little different. That's right. This week we are going to be taking a first super early look at the sound system rebuild that is underway for H3, along with what is basically a total rebuild of the way that handguns work. So you might have just heard that there and gone, wow, it actually sounds like we are standing in a sort of narrow, hard reflective surface. And that's because the new sort of gunshot sound system is a sort of near and far aspect combined system that separates the gunshot from the sort of reverberant nature of the shot. I've got a testing panel to the side here that has a bunch of testing tails. So let's take a look at these. Yes, this Browning high power has been set to actually fire fully automatic. That's just for testing purposes. Don't be like, wait, I didn't think there was a machine pistol of that. So we're testing out inside narrow here, which you just heard. Here's a little more of it. I'll fire it off semi and then full, just so that you can get the whole experience of it. Well, let's pop that out. I'll go over the gun handling changes in a moment. And then we can contrast that to, say, inside small, which is though we were in, say, more like my living room, where it's a sort of a small aspect, maybe some carpeting, way less reverberant, way more sort of like sharp and bracing. Like so. We can go boomier again for inside. Say this is as though we were in a warehouse. Oh, I love the way that sounds. That's totally how the sort of classic warehouse range in H3 will eventually sound when you're firing guns. We've got a forest here. Got a little bit of that reflection from the tree line and such. And then we've got outside super open. Wonderful. And just to compare and contrast, actually, I'll do that in a sec. Let's talk about the changes to handguns a little bit. This is in many ways, this has been a long time coming. Every time I implement a new set of firearms, I end up learning a whole bunch of things about how to build a more accurate and stable and interesting simulation. And the handguns, as they exist in the release version of H3 currently, are pretty much the oldest gun code in the game. I think them and break action shotguns. And so they both don't have a number of the advances that I've made, making closed and open bolt receiver weapons. And some of those things that are missing really impact the accuracy of the gun. So one of the things that is really important to me that's in here now is with any sort of slide fire automatic pistol, there is the distance the slide is back, such that the slide release can lock it, like we see here. But this isn't actually the maximum rearward extent of movement of the slide. It can move a little further back, which is what actually allows us, when we put a loaded magazine into the gun, to grab the slide, pull it back further, and then release it to put a round into battery. So in this case, if I lock the slide back here and keep it, in fact, yeah, let me grab an empty magazine here to keep it locked. You can see I can grab the slide here, and we actually have both that extra bit of rearward movement and appropriate sounds for it. I'm just going to manipulate the gun momentarily so you can hear all those new handling sounds. Etc. Safety toggle, which I believe on this one, yep, we can toggle it when the slide is back as well. Delightful. And because I just got this operational, let's also pop. I know this this barely has a barrel knob for it to attach to, but I'm going to pop a suppressor on this so you can hear the difference of the new suppressor sounds and the way these end up sounding in our various environments. I don't have them for everything yet, but inside narrow. Inside warehouse. Love it. As you can see, its suppressor is very much not silent. Oh, I just love that little crack. And lastly, outside, open. Wonderful. So yeah, so that's where this is at currently. The bad news with all of this is that between the changes that I've made to the sound system for the game and a bunch of stuff that I'm working on in terms of recoil, which I'll talk about more next week, I have kind of sort of had to break every gun in the game. So yeah, so that is why this big update 52 is probably going to take a bit longer. It's probably going to be closer to a 6 to 8 week release cycle as I have to go through and in many ways re-implement most of the game's gun collection. Not 100%, but the Unity side of it. Worth it though. Worth it though. Anywho, now that we've checked this out, let's do a little more warehouse. Wonderful. Let's jump out of VR and talk about what our sort of Q1 2018 roadmap is going to look like.
Yo! So we're out of VR and have the HMD marks to prove it. So let's talk about what the first couple months of 2018 are going to be for H3. As I mentioned a moment ago, I have had to break pretty much all the guns in the game to begin the process of rebuilding this sound system. And importantly, the sound system upgrade isn't just about how things sound and how the engine pools and controls sound, but how I end up working with sound on the firearms. So there's the part of it that you're going to hear and you're going to notice, and there's the part you're never going to see because it's tool development that I'm doing for myself to just make this process smoother, which feeds into, even though I'm mostly talking about Q1, there is one big 2018 goal for the game that I wanted to start off really communicating, which is that we've made it up, including variants, to 150 guns in H3 right now in the release version. It's like 151 or 152, I think. And with all of the models that I've collected and the research that I've done, my big personal goal for 2018, on top of everything else that is going into the game this year and polishing things, is to hit 250. I know it's an arbitrary number, but there's just something about I want to have 1/4 of 1,000 guns in the game, and so I'm determined that's what's going to happen by the end of 2018 unless I get hit by a bus. So to do that, to make that actually a scalable, insane process, especially if I ever want to change something in a large-scale way about firearms in the future as the collection grows, I'm starting off the year doing major code refactors with an eye towards workflow consistency and an eye towards being able to have everything set up so that if I need to find an appropriate balance for something like, say, recoil across a wide selection of firearms, that it's easier for me to compare them, to apply both global changes to the entire set and more nuanced differences between them without having to just navigate a interface to all of that data that burns tons of time, because that's just going to take me away from other things. So Q1 2018 is in a major way about sort of getting my development house in order and going back and addressing scattered parallel implementations of certain concepts that exist across weapon types, and sort of bringing them down into the firearm base class, cleaning them up, making them mutable, consistent, testable, and just which is once again about saving me time, about ensuring that implementations of a given design concept are consistent across guns, because there are still some things that super aren't, and making it feasible to get up to 250 firearms while doing other things. So yeah, so that's the sort of broad strokes about what I'm aiming for to start with. To get more specific about what's going in Q1 is sort of two categories. There's core systems work and the a meaty game mode, or focusing on one. And with how successful it's been and the user response, the current take and hold game mode is going to get first priority this year. It's the first thing that I've been working out heavily on paper, designing a new environment for. There's eventually going to be several. The mode is getting a new name. It's going to be called Meat of Action instead of Take and Hold. In part because the current scene's name makes sense, because the objective within the game loop that you're always doing is taking a point and holding it, and that's the only thing you're doing in that mode. And while that's a game loop that really works and is tight, I think we can all agree that having some variation in objective while still keeping that core, do an objective task, search for loot, do an objective task, search for loot. We want to keep that loop, but we want to add a bunch of variation to it, and especially make sure that that variation works both in a tight, confined indoor space and a more broad outdoor space, especially for those of you who would really like to have a reason to get good using things like scoped bolt actions. So that's going to be the primary game mode that I'm going to be focusing on. But before I can get to that, I've got to get this sound system rebuild done. And coming along with that, because I have to tear all of the firearms apart to do the sound system, I'm doing a bunch of tangential system rebuilds that I'll talk about in greater detail over the next 3 or 4 weeks in the devlog. And those are, as I mentioned, almost done actually, is the total rebuild of the way handguns work to support better handling, differences in trigger type. I've actually got that working. So if you don't know what that means, let's say this is just a blank firing replica. Just, say we have an M9 here. The difference between an M9 and, say, the Browning High Power that we were looking at in VR is that an M9 has what's called an SADA trigger. And what this means is, say we had a loaded magazine here, and the hammer we've got a round chambered, the hammer is back, I can pull the trigger and fire the weapon. With an SADA trigger, I can actually drop the hammer down, have a round chambered, and I can still pull the trigger, which will actually pull the hammer back, cock it, and then release it and fire. That functionality has not been represented in H3 currently, and it will be. So now the handgun implementation in H3 will actually have differences between single action only, SADA, double action only, and striker fired handguns. It has been a pain in the butt to actually get working, all the state juggling, but it works. So yeah, so that's being done. The recoil system is being revised very, very heavily, and I'm not going to talk about it in detail right now, just because that would probably be another 10 to 15 minute talk and demonstration, and I actually want to get a little more of it operable with two-handed firearms so I can demo it to you, not just talk about it. Some changes to the way that I'm representing chambers, ammo pressures, and velocities are going to be different. Right now, if you're firing a 9mm round, say a 9mm FMJ in H3, it always fires the same speed regardless of what firearm it comes out of. This is obviously not correct, because we've got different barrel lengths across different firearms and different sorts of performances. There are also special cases like the MP5 SD that actually bleeds gas out behind the round to make it come out subsonic, even though you're not firing subsonic ammo. And so that's actually going to be represented as well, just to make the damage coming out of firearms be a little more nuanced and a little more accurate. And it's something I'm going to be able to do because I need to write in other parameters for the chamber and for the firearm that includes things like sound pressure. Because that's the other thing I want to work on. Right now, suppressors on firearms in H3 are sort of a binary thing, in that, like, if they're off, bots can hear them out to a pretty significant distance, and they know exactly where the gunshot is. If you have a suppressor on a weapon, the bots are all deaf. And this is not obviously how suppressors work. It does not make guns silent. And so I'm actually building a sort of chart of the various sorts of sound pressures that you get firing rounds suppressed. And I'm going to map that to a bunch of curves and make it so that, say, if you are using a subsonic round with a suppressor on, say, an SMG, that is distinctly more silent than, say, suppressing a 7.62x39 that isn't a subsonic round. And that's actually going to feed into the bot's perceptual system. I'm still figuring out exactly how it works, and I'm not going to be slavishly realistic about it because that wouldn't be terribly fun. But somewhere in between realism and a sort of arcadey nuance that's sort of clear abstract roles for cartridges and suppressors is going to be what's going to be right and fun. So that's about it for my ramble, to give you an idea of where the focus is. Next week, I'll be, as long as something catastrophic doesn't happen this week, I will be talking about the new recoil system, as once I get handguns all rebuilt and operable, I'm going to jump over to open bolt weapons, because they're the most modern and recent implementation, and as such the fastest for me to get working and fixed. And I'll be talking about how recoil is now going to work in H3. I think it's going to be a real improvement that's going to encourage proper use of firearms, not just firing every rifle one-handed gangster style like this, and be quite rewarding and cool. So I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. I hope you thought the little teaser of the sound system was cool and exciting. I know I've been blown away with each iteration as we're getting it operable, and I think by the time we're done, it's going to just be a massive improvement in the way the game sounds and feels. So, talk to y'all soon. Peace.